as usual, let me ask you if you have any questions of a halachic nature that you wish to begin with.
Hi, Shalom, Rav Fink. So I do have a question. I hope I processed it enough to make it clear. If it's possible to follow a principal posek or a great name who studied at Halacha and is able to be posek on a matter, then is there really such thing as Sephardi or Ashkenazi or Temani or whatnot anymore if one could, meaning not culturally, but halachically, if one would otherwise go by the psak that makes sense for them? Not, yeah, I don't know if I'm clear. Not to just to choose randomly, but
This is of course a very important question nowadays because well, we just have to live with reality. They started to let them live in the neighborhood, and once we have them, once we have them nearby, like we just have to learn how to live with it. The of course, you could go out and vote for the right political party, which will set things straight, but let's see if we can deal with this from the halachic point of view. In the old days, as I've explained in the past, in the old days, minhag hamakom, local practice, was lockstep in every city, town, village. Everyone in the village had exactly the same minhagim. Everyone in the town and the city, they davened exactly at the same time, with exactly the same melodies, with exactly the same everything was lockstep until those other guys started moving into the neighborhood. And now we have two minhag communities in the same town. Now, you have to decide, just like in the old days, you had to decide where you're living, which village you're going to live in, which town, which city. Nowadays, you have to decide which is your minhag community. Are you going to associate yourself with this group of Hasidim, or with that yeshiva crowd, or with those Teimanim, or with those Moroccans, or with the Iraqi, or Polish, or Hungarian, or whatever it is, and that will establish your minhag community. And minhag hamokum falls not only upon all the members of the community, and that's something you've decided which community you wish to associate yourself with, but even people who are visiting. In the old days, people visiting from one town to another would, of course, conform to the local minhagim of the town where they're visiting. Nowadays, you go to another synagogue and they have different minhagim, a different minhag community in another synagogue. Well, anything which is apparent to the public, anything you say out loud, for example, you should conform to the minhag of the town. Different texts of kedusha. So something which is out loud and everyone knows everyone can hear what you're saying, you should conform to the local minhag of the synagogue. Something which is silent, like your text of the Shmona Esrei, this does not create any machlokas, this does not create any tension between you and them because they can't hear what you're doing. That's okay. Now, everything I've explained up to this point, I've explained according to the Ashkenaz poskim. It follows, according to the Ashkenaz poskim, that there are different texts for Kaddish. We're going to talk about women reciting Kaddish a little bit later, but there are different texts for Kaddish. If an Ashkenazi is visiting in a Sephardic synagogue, he should recite the Sephardic version of Kaddish. If a Sephardi is visiting in Ashkenaz or whatever it is, you should conform to the local minhag because reciting Kaddish is out loud. People can hear what you're saying. Okay, up to this point, it's the Ashkenaz approach to things. Reb Yosef Karo and the great Sephardic authorities have a very different approach to exactly these issues. And the Sephardic authorities hold, that if you are just temporarily visiting in another minhag community, you retain your minhagim, you keep your home minhagim even while you're visiting in the new community. Everyone understands that there are multiple communities in our town, in Yerushalayim, Paris, London. Everyone knows there are multiple minhag communities in the town, and therefore you're not creating any great machloket just because you recite one version of Kaddish in the other shul, and therefore the Sephardic authorities hold you maintain your own minhagim when you're visiting the other shul. Now, if you think about it for a moment, this creates an irresolvable conflict. There is no solution to this conflict. It doesn't matter which direction you look at. Let's look at the Ashkenazi visiting in a Sephardi synagogue. So the Ashkenazi visiting in the Sephardi synagogue who wants to say Kaddish will say, oh, I should say it according to you, the way you guys do it. I should conform to the local minhag. And the local Sephardim say, no, 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 do it your way, do it your way. The same tension works in the other direction. If the Sephardi is visiting in an Ashkenaz shul, so his rabbis told him he should maintain his own Sephardic minhag, and the Ashkenazim say, no, 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 you must do it our way if you're in our shul. Well, the only solution to this problem is to know your place and not visit, not intermingle, not have any contact with those people, and then all will be well. Now, as you know, if you live in a town with multiple minhagim, which is just about everywhere in the world today, that there are still a few places, there are still Jews in places like Morocco and Azerbaijan. There are still some little Jewish communities here and there in the world where they still have a uniform lockstep minhag within the town, but not many of those left. Uh, I've had the experience, I'm sure you've all had the experience, that as far as this is concerned, as far as individuals are concerned, it's the Sephardic approach which dominates. And therefore, in fact, in practice, Ashkenazim visiting in Sephardic synagogues are saying the Ashkenaz version of Kaddish and the other way around. The Sephardim visiting in the Ashkenaz shuls are saying the Sephardic version of Kaddish. That's for individuals, unless you are the Shliach Tzibur. If you're the Shliach Tzibur, then you are the representative of the Tzibur, and you must follow then the customs and the minhagim of the Tzibur that you are representing. That's the common practice nowadays. So to answer your question in short, once you've decided where you are rooted in this group of Hasidim or in that group of Syrian Jews or Moroccan Jews or whatever it is, then yes, you have to fall in line with the practices of that group where they differ from other groups. Now, this, of course, leaves one big question open. What about Ger Shenisgayer? A Ger Shenisgayer, a new convert to Judaism, has a status like Tinok Shenishba. Being a Ger, being a convert makes you like a new person. You're no longer the person you were. And now the question arises, what are that person's minhagim? A moment ago, the person wasn't Jewish. Now the person comes out of the mikveh and is Jewish. Well, is he or she a Sfaradi, an Ashkenazi, a Taimani, whatever? The answer to this question is, I hope you will not be surprised, a subject of controversy. According to most poskim, the status, the minhag status of the new convert corresponds with the minhag of the community that he was or she was associated with prior to conversion. In the process of conversion, the candidate for conversion learns in a seminary, learns in a yeshiva, has a group of friends, associates with certain rabbis. Well, the network the educational network, the network of friends, the network of rabbis that this candidate for conversion was associating with prior to immersion in the mikveh, that becomes his or her minhag community upon conversion. That's the mainstream view. The maverick view, the minority view on this question, is that of Rav Ovadia Yosef. He held that in Eretz Yisrael, the Marad Atra, the ultimate rabbi of, historically speaking, the greatest of the rabbanim of Eretz Yisrael was the Beis Yosef, Reb Yosef Karo, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, and therefore Rav Ovadia Yosef held a ger shenisgayer be'Eretz Yisrael, a convert who converts in Eretz Yisrael must be a Sfaradi. Well, this is his opinion, and as I pointed out, this is a minority opinion amongst poskim today. Okay? That's
Rabbi Fink, could I
Sounds
ask
like, one second. It sounds like the minhagim have to be taken on as a bundle.
correct.
Oh.
Correct. You shouldn't mix and match.
But halacha is not the case. That case.
Correct. Okay.
Yeah, my question is, if I'm in a supermarket and I want to buy a bottle of wine and I cannot reach for the wine, and I ask one of the non-Jewish assistants to reach for it, and I find out that the wine is lo mevushal, what is the the situation there? Am I allowed to
60 fast days and daily immersion in ice water.
Okay, and then after I'm done, I'll do that.
I forgot the contribution. Yeah, also a financial contribution to my Torah institution.
The Seder, we're done. It's a deal.
Okay. Now, if you want the halachic approach, it is as follows. Let me first deal with the difficult case, and then we'll deal with the simple case, which is your scenario. Yours is the simple case, but I like to make things complicated. So I deal with it with a complicated case first. You're in a restaurant where the bottles of wine are open because you're drinking, you're pouring. Well, of course, you're in a restaurant under rabbinic supervision. That goes without saying. And one of the things that the rabbi, whoever's in charge of the supervision of the restaurant, one of the many things that rabbi should look at is to make sure that all of the wine served is mivushal, previously pasteurized or boiled, and then non-Jews handling it will not prohibit it. But unfortunately, the better quality wines are not mivushal. This is one of the few mistakes that Julia Child imposed upon a whole generation. Julia Haita Omeret, I remember her saying over and over again, the wine you use for cooking should be a good quality wine, the same as you're going to drink during the meal. This is of course probably wrong, because cooking the wine ruins it. Cooking the wine ruins it as far as taste is concerned, and therefore only the cheaper wines are mavushal or pasteurized. According to health authorities, health regulations. Well, there's nothing we can do about them. We just have to live with them as well. According to the health regulations in Israel or any modern country, it is prohibited to package any food or drink in an airtight container unless the food or drink is sterile. Packaging a non-sterile food in a tin, in a can, in a bottle, in a jar, in any container which is sealed, opens the door for absolutely the worst things growing in there, namely botulism. That'll kill you very quickly, botulism. Botulism is anaerobic. Botulism thrives in an oxygen-free atmosphere. And therefore, if you happen to have some botulism in the food, it's going to grow in the tin, in the can, in the jar, in the sealed container, and therefore health authorities require that everything in the sealed container be sterile before it is packaged. And note, of course, that cooking the botulism will not save you. It's not the botulism which is poisonous. It's the secretions of the botulism organism, and though those are not degraded by cooking, cooking will kill the botulism, but you'll still die because of the secretions which the botulism left in the food. Bottom line, the better quality wines, which were not pasteurized, what makes them sterile? They are sterilized by a more expensive process of microfiltration through a ceramic filter, which is a more expensive procedure, but for the better wines, it's worth it. So in a restaurant where they're typically serving better quality wines, not mevushal, the waiters, the non-Jewish waitstaff, are instructed that they're not allowed to handle the bottles of wine, and not and when they're clearing things on the table, moving things on the table, the non-Jewish waitstaff is not allowed to handle any of the wine cups, any of the wine goblets. And when the wine is brought to the table initially, the wine should be brought to the table initially by the mashgiach, who will open it in the presence of the guests on the table, so they know it has not been handled by a non-Jew prior to opening. As long as the bottle has a double seal, the definition of a seal is, by looking at it, you can tell whether the bottle has been opened. A bottle which has a double seal is immune to non-Jewish handling as long as the double seal is intact. Well, the way they do it in the wineries, both in Israel and all over the world, the way it's done in the kosher wineries is everyone who works in the kosher winery is Torah observant up to the point where the wine is finally bottled in a double sealed container, typically a cork, that's one seal. You look at the cork, you can see that it's never been opened. And then typically a plastic shrink wrap seal over the cork. Well, once it's been double sealed, then non-Jewish workers can handle the bottles, put them in boxes, and take them to the stores. And similarly, if you're in Chutz La'aretz and go into a wine shop and buy, kosher Israeli wine or kosher wine from anywhere in a non-Jewish wine shop in Chutz La'aretz, well, as long as the double seal is in place, all is well. Therefore, as far as buying wine in a supermarket, now we come to the easy case. The easy case is the supermarket. Of course, if the wine was mivushal or pasteurized, so subsequent handling by a non-Jew will not prohibit it, will be fine. I emphasize subsequent handling. If the wine was prohibited before it was boiled or before it was pasteurized, pasteurization and boiling do not make the wine kosher. But if the wine was kosher up to the point when it was boiled or pasteurized, then subsequent handling by a non-Jew is irrelevant. And well, if it's mivushal, then no problem at all with non-Jewish staff in the supermarket in Israel or the wine shop abroad handling it. If it is not mivushal, then part of the job of the rabbis who supervise it is to make sure that it has a double seal on it, so all should be well. And and any company which is selling non-mevushal wine with only one seal, something has gone seriously wrong with the rabbinic supervision, making me suspicious about what else might have gone wrong there.
Wow.
Okay, one more point.
Thank you.
One more point has
That's
to be made.
interesting.
I've constantly over and over again, I've equated bishul, cooking the wine, with pasteurization. Pasteurization is heating the wine, but as we know, heating the wine ruins the taste of the wine, and therefore, in pasteurization, it depends on the wine. It's usually somewhere between 72 and 74 degrees centigrade. What you want to do is heat the wine to that temperature very, very quickly, and then cool it off very, very quickly, so it was at the temperature of sterilization only for the briefest time, just long enough to kill any of the bad guys, which is in the wine. But it's really not that hot. I mean, it's too hot to drink, but it's not boiling hot. It's only around the low 70s. Standards vary a little bit from country to country, somewhere between 72 and 74 degrees. The Rav Moshe Feinstein and most poskim hold that, halachically speaking, anything over the temperature of Yad Soledadbo, anything over the temperature which would burn your hand, and the temperature of pasteurization is well above that, it would scald your hand, that's bishul, and all is well. The minority of poskim hold that in order to save the wine, pasteurization is not enough. It has to really boil, a rolling boil with rolling, bubbling boil. That's the minority view. I share with you as a last observation on this particular topic, a story. Here is a story. I once attended a wedding of a cousin in some place, Muncie. Is some place called Muncie near New York? I don't know the area very well. I attended this wedding, and my cousin seated me at a certain table and introduced me to the gentleman sitting next to me. Oh, he is the president of a big winery, big kosher winery. And I've been drinking his wines, and I enjoy them very much. So I have a topic to engage this person in discussion. That's wonderful. It's so hard for me to engage in social discussion, but here I have a ready-made topic. And I say to him, oh, your smaller bottles of wine uh, uh, are all marked mivushal. The larger bottles are marked lo mivushal. To me, they taste the same. Uh, could it be that in the smaller bottles, you're following the opinion of Reb Moshe Feinstein and pasteurization is sufficient, and the larger bottles, you're following the stricter poskim, according to which a rolling boil is required? Well, as soon as I finished my question, he turned his face away. I heard not a single word from him for the rest of the night. The reason for labeling wine lo mevushal is to get a larger share of the market, because there are some Hasidic groups and some Sephardic groups who hold that yayin mevushal is invalid for Kiddush. And if you're following that strict position, then of course you want a bottle of wine which is labeled lo mevushal. But according to whose opinion is it lo mevushal? That's an open question. So that's enough about wine. Okay, we have other issues of a halachic nature to address this morning. Okay, we turn to Kaddish. I always have trouble finding this stuff. Here it is. Voila. Now, the position of women in modern society is a fraught question. The question divides into two categories. On the one hand, what we're not going to talk about today is the position of women in areas outside of Kedusha environment. Today, I want to focus only on the position of women within a Kedusha environment. That's a complicated way of saying the position of women in the synagogue, the position of women in the workplace. Well, we're not going to get into that now. That could be a topic for another session. Now, to what extent can women participate in synagogue procedures or have their own minyan? Well, let's look at the sources and let the sources speak for themselves. First, we have the Chavas Yair. His name was Rav Yair Bachrach, and well, one of the primary sources of Ashkenaz thinking in Halacha. This is the question which he was asked. Davar zah na'aseh be'Amsterdam, u'mefursam sham. A crazy thing happened in Amsterdam, and everyone knows about it. Echad ne'edar b'li ben. A man died with no sons. Had no sons. V'tziva lifnei b'tirato. And before he died, he issued a command before he died, a last will and testament. שילמדו 10 כל יום תוך 12 חודש בביתו בשכרם. In his last will and testament, he left a command that his estate, the money he's leaving behind, should be used to pay 10 Talmidei Chachamim to study Torah every day in his house for 12 months. Oh, no, that's nice. That's nice. Paying Talmidei Chachamim to learn Torah in his house for 12 months after he dies. But now comes the bad part. Achara limud Tamara bat Kaddish, and he wanted his daughter to say Kaddish every day in the presence of these 10 men, every day when they finished their Seder limud, when they finished learning. And horror of horrors, lo michu biyada hachmei kehila v'parnasim, horror of horrors, the rabbis in Amsterdam did not interfere with this. They did not block it. They just smiled and let this woman say Kaddish in the presence of 10 men. Ah, that happens. Va'af ki ein ra'aya l'stor hadavar. And even though I cannot prove that this was a bad thing to do, after all, women are also commanded to sanctify God's name, just like men. Kiddush Hashem is equal for men and women. I cannot prove that what this woman did was wrong. And there was a minyan, there were 10 men there. Well, the whole source of Kaddish is Rabbi Akiva. Now, Rabbi Akiva, in a moment I'm going to tell you the story of Rabbi Akiva. But first, I want to tell you where the story comes from, the source of this story. Rabbi Akiva's story that I'm about to tell you about is not in the Mishnah. It's not in the Gemara. It's not in the Yerushalmi. It's not in any midrash. There is absolutely no source for this story of Rabbi Akiva that I'm about to tell you, aside from one sefer, the Or Zarua, a rabbi in 13th century, the area which is today called Austria. A rabbi in the 13th century wrote this sefer, Or Zarua, and in there he tells this story about Rabbi Akiva. Here's the story. Once Rabbi Akiva had a dream. Someone who had died came to Rabbi Akiva in a dream. The person's neshama was black. Rabbi Akiva asked the neshama, the soul of the departed, "What's wrong? What's your problem?" And the departed explained that he's in trouble because he needs more zchut, more mitzvah zchut, in order to make it into Gan Eden. Rabbi Akiva says, "Don't worry, I'm going to take care of it." The next day, Rabbi Akiva wakes up. He finds this guy's son and a young boy, and teaches the boy how to say Kaddish. This is the whole source of Kaddish. This story is where Kaddish comes from, and brings the boy to the synagogue and has the boy recite Kaddish in the synagogue, Le'ilui Neshama, to elevate the soul of his departed father. And being Makadesh, Shem Shemayim Barabim, sanctifying God's name in public, that's what Kaddish is, elevates the neshama, the soul of the departed. That's what Rebbe Akiva teaches us in this story. But Rebbe Akiva taught the son how to say Kaddish, didn't teach the daughter how to say Kaddish. Well, that's just a story. That just happened. Maybe there were no daughters. I mean, who knows? Just because Rebbe Akiva taught the son doesn't mean necessarily that he wouldn't have taught the daughter if there were a daughter. Who knows whether there was a daughter or not? Makol makom, yesh svara degam babat yesh to'elet nachas ruach lenefesh. So the same idea of sanctifying God's name in public by reciting a Kaddish, in theory, should apply equally to a woman and a man. It just happens to be part of the story that it was a boy who was available to do the job and not a daughter. Well, in theory, we
Can I just
cannot.
add one thing or thing? Just
Yes,
the Kaddish, he created the nusach for the Kaddish also, or there was Kaddish, he knew about
apparently,
it?
apparently, perhaps the nusach was previously known, but we have no sources for it.
Thing, was he teaching him something that existed, or he created something and gave it over to him?
We have no sources for it. We have no sources for it in our traditional Sforim, not in the Mishnah, not in the Gemara, not in the Midrash, not in the Yerushalmi. When I say there are no sources, I mean there are no sources in our literature.
I mean, it says in the Gemara that like kol ona kilu ameni heshmei rava with b'chol kocho. That's in the Gemara, right? So there's some
Yeah,
concept of the.
but this is not the. This is
I mean, that's part of Kaddish.
only a tiny part of Kaddish. But in historical sources, non-Jewish, in Greek sources, there are plenty of references. Even in the second century, there are plenty of references to Jews reciting Kaddish. So of course, it's difficult to figure out exactly what the text was, since they refer to it in Greek and never refer to it in whole. But probably the text is older than Rebbe Akiva, probably. In any event, the story of Rebbe Akiva is itself very suspicious, since it first appears in the 13th century. So, but up to this point, the Chavis Yair has not been able to prove that there's anything wrong with a woman saying Kaddish in the presence of 10 men. But, well, maybe it's even a good idea, he thinks. Nonetheless, Makol Makom, Yesh lachush she'al yedei kach yechlishu koach haminhagim shel bnei Yisrael. But if we would allow this, like they did in Amsterdam, we're going to weaken the strength of customs. This is a new practice. This is a new custom that no one ever heard of before, and we cannot allow new customs, just like we cannot allow changes in customs. Gamkein Torah, our minhagim, are one of the mainstays of Torah, and we cannot allow them to change. We cannot allow innovations in minhagim. If we would allow this, everyone will dream up his own new minhagim. Everyone will build an illicit altar outside of the Beis HaMikdash. Everyone will develop his own minhagim. We can't have everyone doing his own thing. We can't have everyone doing their own thing. We need uniformity of practice. The Jewish people have to be one, have to be united. Allowing people to introduce new minhagim and to change minhagim, that makes the rabbis a laughing stock. No one will take Torah seriously anymore because everyone will be doing something different. Yavol l'zalzel, people will have disrespect for Torah if we allow this. And that's what we find in the Tosafot. Haba lishchot b'sof bracha. The Gemara says, anyone who wants to bow down at the end of every bracha of Shmona Esrei. Oh, you might think it's a great act of piety. Well, it is a great act of piety to bow down more than the required number of times during Shmona Esrei. But no. We cannot introduce any changes in our minhagim. Everyone has to bow down 4 times, not more, not less, in Shmona Esrei. That's what the Gemara says. You can't change things, even though there might be a very strong pious reason. Al-Pi Hasidus, Midas Hasidus, there might be a strong reason to approve of the change. Still, we don't do it. Now, at this point, I want to introduce a tiny historical fact which might change your understanding of what the Chavas Yair is talking about. In the 30 Years' War, if you remember history from primary school, in the 30 Years' War, there were a lot of people died. Well, true in war in general, but in the 30 Years' War, there were a huge number of Yesaimim, Jewish orphans. And this created a technical problem in the synagogues because since days of the Or Zarua, up until the 30 Years' War, the minhag was exactly one person recites Kaddish, never 2 people or more. Oh, well, if there was more than one mourner in shul, more than one person had a parent who died, or an immediate relative who died, they would take turns. One day, one person would say Kaddish, the next day, the other person would say Kaddish, but only one person said Kaddish. And the way it worked was the mourner who said Kaddish would step to the front of the synagogue and wear a tallis, just like the Shliach Tzibur. The mourner who would get the honor of saying Kaddish that day would stand next to the Shliach Tzibur, and would be the Shliach Tzibur, would represent the community in saying Kaddish, but only one person. Well, if you only have a small number, a handful of mourners in the community, they can take turns, and in the course of the week, they're all going to get a turn to say Kaddish. But in the 30 Years' War, there were so many orphans that many of them would never have an opportunity to act as Shliach Tzibur and say Kaddish for Ilui Neshama, to elevate the souls of their deceased parents. This was back in the days of Rabbi Akiva in the 17th century, and he and the other rabbis instituted this new practice of all of the Avelim, all of the mourners reciting Kaddish simultaneously in a chorus, and that's what we have today in most synagogues. Now, think about it for a moment from the historical point of view. This innovation of changing Kaddish from one Shliach Tzibur reciting it in front of the congregation to a chorus of all of the Avelim saying it together, this had its origins in Prussia in the 17th century and became fairly standard throughout the Ashkenaz world, outside of Germany itself. In Germany itself, when we say Germany, the borders of these European countries change all the time. The area which was thought of as being Germany back in the 17th century, before the different parts unified into one new country, in any event, in the German-speaking areas, they retained to this very day the practice of one person and only one person saying Kaddish. Now, since only one person says Kaddish at a time, questions always arise: who has precedence? given someone in mourning for a parent, and someone else in mourning for a brother, and someone else in mourning for a son, a daughter, a sister. Who gets preference? Who gets preference? And one mourner is in the 30-day period, another mourner is in the 1-year period. Well, the poskim talk endlessly about the rules for how to decide which Avel has din kedima, has precedence in getting the right to say Kaddish. Now, Makol Makom, min Hagan Yisrael, Tarei Tzarich Hizuk, we must do everything we can to strengthen the minhagim and keep them constant. Af al pi shelo ne'emar sham rak melamdin also shelo lishchos. Of course, when the Gemara said that we do not teach the people to bow down in every bracha of Shemona Esrei, the Gemara doesn't actually say we object to it, but we do. We do object to it. Hareze meguna, it's disrespectful to bow down in every bracha because it's a violation of the minhag. Makom makom, yesh lomar, shiny hasam, dilagame lo yilmedu, rak yachshavu legas ruach, v'lachein b'nidon shalan b'sefer avud, ein lebechos. Now, bottom line is left with the following conclusion. In Amsterdam, they did not object to the daughter saying Kaddish. And bottom line, we have no proof to object to that. Very unhappy with it because it's a change in minhagim, but we cannot openly object. Well, you understand his how he's conflicted on this matter. He doesn't like it, but it's really okay. Let's go one step further. The Berhetev, at the bottom, a standard commentary in the bottom of the page in every standard edition of the Shulchan Aruch. B'nei banim yacholim l'mar Kaddish. Grandchildren, grandsons are allowed to say Kaddish. A grandson can say Kaddish for a grandparent. However, Sharav Elim Yomru Shnei Kaddishim Vehem Kaddish Echad. If you have 3 Kaddishes in the course of the day, Shachris Mincha Ma'ariv, the grandson gets the right to say 1 Kaddish. Children have the right to say 2 Kaddishes. Although grandsons can say Kaddish, we don't give them as many Kaddishim to say as proper sons. Ein chiluk min ha'av min ha'em, doesn't matter whether we're talking about a paternal or a maternal grandson. Now, the Knesset Yecheskel, one of the big poskim in the 17th, 18th century, says, and this is still quoting the Berhetev, Dafka ben, he says, no. Only the paternal grandson can say Kaddish. Well, ben abat, but the maternal grandson should not say Kaddish at all. Kol shekain labat, all the more so, any daughter should not say Kaddish in Beit Knesset. Im rotzim lasod minyan, if a daughter, a woman, wants to say Kaddish, should be Adam. They have the option of doing so. They can do it. Now let's understand the background underlying this position. I just explained to you that in those days, exactly 1 person said Kaddish. And if there's competition between multiple Avelim, all of whom wanted to say Kaddish, the question is, who has Din Kedima, who has greater right to say Kaddish? And this poskim speak about endlessly. Well, if it's a conflict between sons and grandsons saying Kaddish, both can do it, but we give more Kaddishim to the grandson. If there's a conflict between a woman saying Kaddish and a man, we give preference to the man saying Kaddish. Reshut bi'adam, if the community wishes, they can permit a woman to say Kaddish in the synagogue. Once again, the Berhetev, in the name of the Knesset Yecheskel, holds like the Chavas Yair that we saw previously. If there's no proof, there's no objection to a woman saying Kaddish, it's not something that we encourage. Why do we not encourage it? Well, according to my explanation, we don't encourage it because there are a limited number of opportunities to say Kaddish. There's already a lot of competition for who's going to get the right to say Kaddish, and we're reluctant to increase the pool of people who are going to be competing to say Kaddish. If a woman wants to, and the congregation agrees, it's okay. Let's go one step further. The Shvus Yaakov, another big name from the 18th century. Niftar ish echad v'lo haya kim shtei banot ktanot. Man died, he had only two small daughters. Hagdola, bat arba shanim, the older daughter was 4 years old. B'shas choliyah, when he was on his deathbed, tziva Elisha eten lo hatara shebito gedola toma kaddish. When he was on his deathbed, he asked me, the rabbi, to permit his older daughter, 4 years old, to say Kaddish in the synagogue. Tshuva. Ika sheila zo matzati ra'iti kedivrei gisi gaon b'sifro Eliyahu. This question is already discussed in a sefer written by my great brother-in-law, Rav Elia Shapiro, in his sefer Elia Zuta, which is a commentary on the Nishal My brother-in-law was asked exactly this question, and my brother-in-law responded as follows: L'chora, apparently, hadin im shar avelim. Apparently, it would seem that where there is a conflict about who is going to have the right to say Kaddish, well, ledorei dorot, for generations, the Kaddishim have been divided among sons of deceased persons. So there's no room in this minhag to start dividing the right to say Kaddish in shul, the one person who's going to say Kaddish. No room to change that minhag and include women in the Toranut. Kaimalan ein abba mizaka bra. Surely we're not going to allow a grandfather to say Kaddish for a grandson who died. We're not going to allow him into the competition for who has a right to say Kaddish. We don't want to broaden the pool. We don't have enough Kaddishim to go around as it is. And therefore, we're surely not going to allow a grandfather or even a father to say Kaddish for a son. No. It's the sons, according to the story of Rebbe Akiva. It's the sons who bring elevation to the soul of their fathers, according to the story, which is the origin of Kaddish. It's not fathers who elevate the souls of their sons. The whole purpose of Kaddish is for the descendant, the son, the grandson, maybe the daughters as well, to elevate the soul of the parent. Ba'aviv lo shayach kein, makes no sense for a father to say Kaddish for a son. He's not going to get a turn in synagogue to do that. L'chora chaya nira d'yesh l'aviv lo makadish. It makes sense that the father should be sanctified. It makes sense that the father should sanctify the name of God in public. Ach v'rak kevan shehisna rama dafka b'makom sheyesh mina kavua be'ir. Of course, we need a minyan. Kiddush Shem Shemayim Birabim, sanctifying God's name in public requires a public, so you have to have a minyan for that. B'lav hachi, without a minyan, there's no room for Kaddish at all. Ein lazuz midvarav, my brother-in-law was right, and we should not change minhagim. But b'dinon shilfanenu shekvar hiniach bat omeret Kaddish b'bayit. But this man wants his daughter to say Kaddish, not in the synagogue, but in their home. Etzel minyan. This man wants, after he dies, he wants to gather together a minyan in his home so his daughter can say Kaddish. She's not going to be stealing away. She's not going to be taking away one of the Kaddishim from the mourners in the synagogue. She's going to be saying Kaddish privately at home. The whole objection to women saying Kaddish was that we don't have enough Kaddishim as it is to distribute among the people who have a minhag to say Kaddish for elevation of their parents' souls, just like we don't want to increase the pool with parents and grandparents saying Kaddish for children and grandchildren. Similarly, we don't want to increase the pool by allowing women to do it, but privately at home. This is not interfering with the regular scheduling, with the regular Toranut, who's going to have the right to say Kaddish in the synagogue. We can't allow this in the synagogue because it will take away the rights of the other mourners. We can be satisfied, we can be happy with this practice of the woman saying Kaddish as long as it's not in the shul. And the problem with doing it in the shul is that it takes away one of the Kaddishim of the other mourners. Let's go one step further. Tshuva Me'ahava. Rav Fleckelis was his name. He was the Talmud Muvhak of the Nodeb Yehuda, Rav Yecheskel Lander, the great Rav of Prague in the 18th century. Im bat tuchal lomar Kaddish babayit b'minyan asara. Can a woman say Kaddish privately at home if she has a minyan there? Yesh lachush she'al yidei kach yechlashu koach minhagim. I'm afraid that if we allow this, it will weaken the strength of minhagim. People will no longer respect minhagim. People are going to start doing things in different ways. People are going to start observing the Jewish religion and keeping Torah in different ways. We want everyone to keep Torah in the same way. Kol echad boneh, it should say. I'm not a good typist. Everyone will build his own illicit altar, just like we saw the other poskim say. We don't want that. We want uniformity of practice. Lachein, therefore, we should object to the woman saying Kaddish privately at home. It's a change of minhagim. And to say in shul, absolutely not. This is surely prohibited because we don't have enough opportunities to say Kaddish anyway. Mali cotton, Mali gartel, doesn't matter whether the woman is a grown woman or a little girl. Lo ya'ut, it's not proper to allow women in the synagogue, and therefore we're going to object to this. Well, you see, as we move historically through the sources, we're now coming to the Tshuva Me'ahava, the more recent source, and the tide seems to be turning. In the earlier sources, there was the whole objection, if any, the whole objection to women saying Kaddish was it would interfere with the limited number of opportunities that the sons have to say Kaddish. And the minhag is for them to say it. But aside from this, there's no fundamental objection. Tshuva Me'ahava, we now see a turn in the thinking of the poskim. No, holds it's prohibited. Let's take a look at the Mata Ephraim from the 19th century. Lani Adati, in my humble opinion, Bezman Hazeh Shchiach Pritzusa, Ve'ein Lasos Kei. Nowadays, there's a lot of improper behavior. This is a polite way of saying, the women are not modestly dressed when they come to the synagogue. We cannot invite women into the men's section of the synagogue because they are not nowadays They are not modestly dressed. Tomer bat kadesh, afilu b'minyan v'beita. Even in her own private home, a woman should not say kaddish, because nowadays the women are not properly dressed. Afilu achar limud, even if you have 10 men learning Torah together, a woman should not say kaddish, even in her private home. Even though she's not singing, there's no problem. We're not talking here about the singing voice of a woman. But even though the woman is not singing Kaddish, almost for sure, she's going to modulate her voice in an attractive manner. Almost surely there's going to be something erotic about her voice when she recites Kaddish. Almost for sure. We cannot tolerate that. We never saw such a thing, never heard of this minhag of women saying Kaddish. If she wants to do something to elevate the soul of her deceased parent, she should go to the synagogue, sit silently in the women's section, and answer Amen when she hears brachas, answering Amen when she hears brachas, sitting in the women's section of the synagogue. That will be the greatest way she can elevate the soul of her deceased parent. Well, now into the 19th century, we have stronger objections. In the 20th century, Aselech Harav, Rav David Alevi, he was the chief rabbi of Tel Aviv for many years, and among the most liberal of poskim in the 20th century, hardly knew how to prohibit anything. Well, he talks about someone who wanted his daughter to say Kaddish at the funeral. He had no sons, and he says, when I die and they're going to bury me, at the funeral, I want my daughter to say Kaddish. Shuva. Not Rov Gedolei poskim hilim no Amir's Kaddish. Well, we've seen that most poskim are against it, and we've seen why they're against it. It's a strange thing that we should have new minhagim like this, women saying Kaddish at a funeral. But I don't understand why the poskim all say that having women reciting Kaddish is going to weaken Jewish practice. Isn't it just the opposite? Isn't women saying Kaddish a strengthening of Jewish practice? I don't understand what they mean. If we're talking about instituting a new minhag where after every death they assemble a minyan in the house of the deceased so that daughters can say Kaddish, that indeed is a new minhag. And why should we all of a sudden require all of the daughters to say Kaddish in a private minyan at home when one of their parents dies? Why should we impose a new minhag like this upon all daughters? Why does a woman reciting Kaddish make a laughing stock? Why is that mockery of the rabbis? If the daughter says Kaddish in a minyan in her home, how is this a mockery of Jewish minhagim? Just the opposite. Of course, if a daughter is Mekadesh, Shem Shamayim Barabim, if a daughter sanctifies God's name in public, isn't that a great merit? Well, of course, that should be a great merit for the soul of the deceased. But bottom line, it's the sons who do it in the synagogue. That it's a violation of minhagim for individual women to do it. I have no understanding why this is a violation of minhagim. To impose upon all daughters, that would be a new thing that we don't want to do. Nonetheless, all the poskim seem to be opposed. Bottom line, Lo natanu l'sha'en ala tshuvas Rav Shus Yaakov. Bottom line, we have to rely upon the few leniencies which we've seen in the earlier poskim, that a woman can say Kaddish in a private minyan in her home. That's all he's willing to permit. So what have we seen? The earlier sources, which had no objection, more modern sources, 19th and 20th century poskim, the tide is turned, and some room for a private minyan at home, but surely not in the synagogue. Now, let's take a look at Rav Henkin. Rav Henkin was the greatest of the rabbis back in the days, back in the early and mid 20th century in New York. Rav Moshe Feinstein used to always say, Rav Henkin is the greatest of the rabbis in New York. He was originally from Lithuania. Im bat tavolit palel be'ezras nashim. If a woman comes to daven in the women's section of the synagogue, betachshir maaser bekedusha Shabbos, and she's from nothing immodest, but she dresses properly, she keeps Shabbos, she keeps kosher, she's a Torah observant woman. Tachbotz lomar Kaddish, and she wants to say Kaddish b'fnei anoshim, in the presence of the women, in the women's side of the synagogue. And she wants to say it at the same time that the men are saying Kaddish on the men's side of the synagogue. Ein kapeda, there's no reason to object. Oh, if we have a woman who is shomer mitzvahs, and therefore no issue of priestess, no issue of immodesty, and she wants to say Kaddish in the women's section at the same time that the men are saying Kaddish in the men's section. And notice now in the 20th century, we're in the historical period where Kaddish is recited by a chorus, not just one person at a time. Well, we have multiple men saying Kaddish simultaneously. No objection to a woman saying at the same time. But if she wants to come into the men's section, even though she's dressed modestly, that's not the objection here. Still, belevushe America, in the American style of dress, that's the opposite of kedusha, and therefore we should not let her say Kaddish in the men's section of the synagogue. She can say it at the same time the men are saying in the women's section. Now, Rav Henkin, that we just quoted, had a grandson, has a grandson, he's still alive, wrote the B'nai Banim. So this is the grandson of the previous source. Of course, a woman can say Kaddish in the women's section. Of course, he just copying over what his grandfather wrote. Even though the mechitza is not floor to ceiling, it doesn't matter. If she's saying it in the women's section, all is well. We don't have to be concerned with the objections we've seen in the earlier poskim, because they were talking about cases where only one person says Kaddish in shul, and the poskim have long ago decided the din kadima, who takes precedence where there's conflict of interest in who's going to say Kaddish. That's a settled matter, and we cannot upset the whole balance by introducing women. One last source, the Igros Moshe himself. He wrote, and these are his words, Ein chiyuv mechitza lahafsik b'fnei kama noshim bilvad. We need a mechitza only if you have many women. A few women in shul, you don't need a mechitza if it's only a few women. Exactly what's a few women and what's a lot, I'm not willing to commit myself at the moment, he says. But if it's only one or two, that's surely only a few women. For example, if only one or two women come to the synagogue for mincha during the week or during synagogue, you don't need a mechitza. They can daven together with the men. They should just sit on the side, separate from the men, that's all. Behold, through all the generations, the way Jewish life was in Europe. Nahagu lifamim, it has occasionally occurred. Hayta nichneset isha aniyah, a poor woman would come into the synagogue. It was an occasional occurrence. Poor women would come into the synagogue, the kabel stuck up, to ask, to beg, to ask for charity. Oh, avela. Well, sometimes it was not a poor woman who came into shul. Sometimes it was a woman who lost her parent, whose parent had died, who came in to say Kaddish. In Europe, through all the generations, it was not rare that a woman who was in mourning would come into shul to say Kaddish. No perpetuates necessary, because it was only one woman, not many women. Halacha l'maisa, bottom line, tzrich iyun, tluya b'harbe inyanim. Bottom line, I'm not ready to decide exactly how many women is many, but ba'akrai, occasionally having a woman in shul saying Kaddish in the presence of the men. Well, this has been going on in the synagogues in Europe for a long time, and there's no objection to that. We have some little proof for this in the Gemara. The Gemara talks about why a woman should not get an aliyah Torah, as we have spoken about in earlier shiurim. And the Shulchan Aruch says the reason a woman should not get an aliyah is because of kvod hatzibur. We've spoken about this many times in the past. The Gemara, the Shulchan Aruch apparently has no objection to a woman being physically present in the men's section. If that were prohibited, then the entire discussion, beginning to end, of a woman getting an aliyah is impossible. The very fact that it's discussed, the very fact that there are discussions about women getting an aliyah, and the reason for the objection has nothing to do with their being present in the men's section, is a little bit of a proof that it's okay for women to be in the men's section. Rav Aaron Soloveitchik, who was the Rosh Yeshiva in Chicago for many years, Nira Achshav Kama Anashim V'Nashim Yisrael Lohamim Ba'ad Shivui Nashim. There's out there in the world a struggle for equality of rights, equal footing for men and women. If women saying Kaddish is all about a cultural battle, I want no part of it. If the woman wanting to say Kaddish is motivated by spiritual reasons, that's a good reason to be lenient. But if it's just the culture wars, well, this is no reason to change practices in the synagogue. There must be a pious reason for the woman to say Kaddish. She must be motivated by piety and not political matters. Rav Shaul Yisraeli, who was one of the leading Zionist poskim in Eretz Yisrael in the 20th century, Im Isha Toma Kaddish B'Kol Ragil Be'ezras Nashim, if she says Kaddish in a normal speaking voice, Yesh Makom L'Latir, we can permit that. We just don't want her singing Kaddish. Ein Bazeh Mishum Hachlashat Minhagim, we're not upsetting any minhagim here. Im Zot Kedai L'Tzayen Sheyeshna Yoter Pshuta. If she doesn't want to say Kaddish herself in the women's section, there's a simple solution. If she doesn't want to do that, she can hire someone to say Kaddish in the men's section if she wishes. Well, these are the primary sources about women saying Kaddish. Just to summarize, nowadays, when Kaddish is recited in a chorus, and all of the Avelim recite Kaddish together, there's no clear objection, no apparent objection, no objection at all to the woman saying Kaddish in the women's section to get together with the chorus of men who are saying it in the men's section. What we've not addressed is, of course, women making a separate minyan of women, a women's minyan, but the status of women's minyans, that deserves a separate discussion another time. I'm going to pause here and open up the floor if you have any questions that you wish to ask.
Shalom. I was curious, is it possible for in the previous times that one would be saying, is one saying Kaddish on behalf of everybody who's not saying? No, it's just that person, just for their father and mother.
Well,
Wow.
as I mentioned earlier, back in the days when one person said Kaddish, he would walk to the front of the synagogue, put on a tallis, and stand next to the Shliach Tzibur. And for Kaddish, the mourner would be the Shliach Tzibur, the representative of the Kehillah. And just as the Chazan, the Shliach Tzibur, represents the Kehillah through the whole of davening, and similarly, the one saying Kaddish does. So yes, indeed, the person chosen to say Kaddish fulfills the obligation fulfills the minhag for all those who wish to say it, and the other mourners just have to listen and say Yehei Shmei Rabbah and Amen at the proper time, and they fulfilled their minhag. There's a little bit of a problem in the terminology of the poskim. Poskim talk endlessly about when there are two people who want to say Kaddish, which one has a chiyuv. The word chiyuv is used over and over again by the poskim in deciding who is going to say Kaddish in shul, but what they're really talking about is a minhag. The terminology is not so precise.
And is there any room for that idea in today for someone who either like misses the start of it, saying Kaddish, or just doesn't have vocal cords right now at that point?
Someone whose parent has died and listens to someone else reciting Kaddish, as long as the person reciting Kaddish has intention to saying it for you, and you have intention to fulfill your minhag by listening, then responding Yehei Shemei Rabbah and Amen at the proper time is indeed sufficient.
And we wouldn't be able to rely on the default of someone saying Kaddish as they're saying for anybody in the room who needs. We can't rely on that.
Back in the days when one person stood in front of shul, the chazaka was, the assumption was, of course, he's saying it for everyone. Now, when everyone says it in a chorus, you can no longer assume that. Okay. Any other issues for today? Then let us pause. I'm going to wish you a good week and eventually a good Shabbos. Shabbat Shalom. Forward to seeing you all again next Monday. Until then, Shalom, Shalom.
Rav Fink,
Yes, Jody.
can I make a quick request? It's got nothing to do with today.
Sure.
To the brachas of Neni, and particularly rainbow, or is that, no, rainbow, lightning, thunder.
Birchot HaRe'iyah, Birchot HaShmiyah. We can definitely devote a class to that. Very good.
Thank you.
Okay, no problem.
Thank you, Rav Fink. Shabbat
Okay.
Tov, Chodesh Tov, Shabbat Shalom.
Shalom.
You all.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye-bye.